Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, a series of educational podcasts that showcase the connection between human capabilities and good work design, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia. Today, I'm chatting with Elise Crawford. Elise has a PhD, is a professional ergonomist and safety professional. She's currently a lecturer and researcher at CQUniversity, leading the practical human factors and ergonomics activities for residential schools for the undergraduate and postgraduate students. This work supports the development of emerging human factors and ergonomics professionals. This episode is part 2 of a 2-part series discussing good work design with Elise Crawford. In this episode, Elise discusses the various human factors and ergonomics tools that can be used for work analysis, usability, and good work design.
What type of tools are you using when you're working and designing in human factors?
Well, first of all, I tend to follow a design thinking process. So to empathise, first of all, get to know the task, get to know the person doing the task. So I'll typically interview them. Like that's a very, you'll say, well, that's not a human factors tool, but it's very ancient and it's going to keep being used in the future, but it's very useful for asking them, what do you think about this? What do you do here? But certainly I look at the person in their environment and try to find out not just, what are you doing and how are you doing it, my favourite task analysis tool is the hierarchical task analysis tool for that. And that's a well-established human factors method that we've been using for years and one that will be used for years. But that helps you break down the tasks by asking the operators to say, conduct a cognitive walkthrough. That's just a think aloud, talk aloud. So talk aloud, what is it? They call it a talk aloud protocol or something. So they actually do the task. And what they're doing is they say, I'm making a decision about this because I see this here on my screen or I've gotten this feedback here. So now I'm doing this, especially for cognitive tasks. You'll watch somebody working and you can't tell what they're thinking or doing. They look like they're just staring into a screen. So it's very important, those cognitive walkthroughs where they'll explain what they're looking at, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and things like that. And sometimes to break it down like that is difficult for operators. So to have them do it as they do a job is so much easier. So I use cognitive walkthroughs a lot. And so that's an interview technique where they're talking about their job. So I'm trying to get to know, well, what are they doing? What do they need to get their job done? And then I like the tabular system that Kerwin and Ainsworth also developed. It's where you would itemise the things in the task that you've gleaned from the hierarchical task analysis. And then you'll actually, so if I'm looking at a system they're working in, I'm looking at, first of all the decision points. What stimuli are you looking for? When you see it, what does it look like? So is it audio, visual, things like that? And how do you know when you need to make the decision? It might be, well, when the level rises to this, or when I see the orange or the green light come on, then that triggers me. I can make a decision now because I've got that feedback. And so there's a table that helps you itemise all those things so that you can understand the design of that program and how it's supporting the person. And then you're itemising all the physical things and artefacts. Yes, that's a cognitive task analysis for the design of an interface. And so we're working a lot with technologies. So those are two, I guess that's 3 common tools that I will use.
And then how do you analyse that data?
So what you're looking for then is error sources or sources of frustration. Sometimes it's not error sources. So when you're looking at safety critical systems, unless it's a new one, there won't be, hopefully. I mean, if there were major problems with it, there'd be a lot of overt things happening, accidents and things. So And I laugh at this because my students, we go to a local railway control room, and they're trying to find, of course they're OHS students, they're trying to find all these error sources, and they're very disappointed when they can't. But what I'm trying them to realise, and while this is human factors, it gives them a taste of human factors in design, but it's about getting to that nitty-gritty, like, is that alarm too loud and it's distracting all these other people, or is it coming on too early or too late, or, so that they realise that the design of this system is going to impact the safety. So, yes, there's very much participation. So I'm not creating a task for this operator. They are really building it, and I'm just really a facilitator or a note taker, an administrator, and just asking the right questions. And so the tools help us ask those right questions, help us look for the right things to look for. And then from that, then you're looking at error sources or points of frustration. How can you streamline it more? How can you make it more enjoyable for the person? And then you prioritise those. And I like to use what I call an incident table. I learned that from user experience. So they will show screenshots if it's an interface of where the problem is, and they will prioritise it according to this as a catastrophe. That would be if you can't move on from this problem, down to, it's aesthetic, but it'd be a nice to have if we can. And sometimes it's worth looking at those because they can be quite inexpensive. So if you're addressing something, you can address that as well. So I think it's nice to include those. But that helps you organise a priority, because sometimes you just can't do them all. Some things are quick to do, some are slow to do. But these are similar processes, I guess, we would do if we were doing a risk assessment as well. If we're creating something new, we will prototype. And the thing about prototyping is you keep it simple when you first share it with your workers, because if it's too developed, they'll think, what can I say? You've already got everything done. But if it's paper-based or drawings, or even like the architecture of an app, for instance, you can have these little things that you pull up and they pretend to click on it, and then you show them what they'll see afterwards. That's simple. It just seems really crude, but that's where you get the best ideas from the workers. And also, so it's at that design stage, especially useful if you're involved in bespoke technologies, for these workers. So that works really well. So that prototyping is a constant trial. You'll design something, you'll test it with the users, and you need to test it with the people who will actually be using it, not someone who used to be in that role 10 years ago or not someone off the street, these hired users. It should be the person who needs it, because they're the ones who know what they need to achieve to ensure the job's done right. So there's this, it's very iterative. And it gets very messy, and sometimes you've got to start again. But it's better to do that in paper form or paper-based or cardboard, or even very crude technical positioning, then once it's all done, and then it's very expensive to start all over again. So that's why, but a human factors expert can put them through that process. If it's selecting technology off the shelf, which is often the case, it's really important to include the person who'll be using it. And sometimes, of course, it's expensive to take them off their job and allow them to be on this project, especially if they're the experienced ones and they're the ones that you want. So getting that buy-in from managers to appreciate what, say, a human factors professional is trying to achieve, I think is important. So you do need that management acceptance and recognition of what can be done, and on board with that. And I think if we work to improving the experience of work, we're more likely to retain our staff if they know that if something isn't working and they offer suggestions and they get feedback, now the feedback might be that, no, we can't do that, but they know why they can't. If they don't get any feedback, then they're wondering, does anyone bother reading these suggestions? And I'll never do it again because they're a waste of time, So you have to, it's part of that relationship. You value them. They need to know they're valued. So you're treating them like an asset. And you say, well, you also give them the option, would you like to get involved in the design, or would you like to be partly involved? And then you could say, well, we will help you with how, we will direct you through this. So it's not like you need a degree in design. We will, take you through it and things like that. So sometimes it's a confidence thing. Sometimes they've been burnt in the past. So, for instance, just to give an example of how you can upset your workforce, they can be really, give a lot of input. I was at this one, I was called in, I got a job to come in and train managers on this new system where they're going to identify hazards and report risks that are there to be attended to. And so I learnt the program and I came in and there was really strong resistance. These managers did not want to learn how to use this program. And some people we're all different personalities. So I managed to train some. But then I became aware that the department, the head office was talking about the department I was trying to change as though they're behind and they're slow and, we're going to really have to roll out this training really heftily because these guys are just so slow at it. And of course, it was also reflecting on me, like I'm not getting anywhere and they're not doing anything. So I had this kind of a heart-to-heart talk and said, look, I'd really like to be able to, show them that we're not this slack department, right? And so then one of the managers said to me, he said, and this was at a time of a business merger. He said, we have just completed a whole risk register, risk management process that is context relevant to us. It is what we needed. It's how we like to report it and to fill it out. And, we spent a lot of time getting the forms not so cumbersome and specific for them. And now we have to go to this generic, cumbersome program that also includes all sorts of other stuff. And the hazard identification and risk assessment areas were right down the bottom of this great big long form. Reminds me of a lot of enterprise systems that I come across. And so he said, we did all that. It was perfect for us. And now we have to adopt this substandard thing because head office wants everyone to be the same. And that is the danger with safety management systems for multinationals because it's easier to have one for everybody. And I worked in another place too where they were rolling out the training for all the dozer operators and drag lines and everything. So they were developed at head office and you don't know who they consulted with, and everybody is going to follow the exact same procedures. So there's a lot of assumptions there that everyone's got exactly the same equipment, the same situations, and maybe if it was all in one country, but a lot of times there's developing countries involved as well, and that makes you wonder, do they have the same technology? And, so I highly not really for those.
Let's talk about the variability in work and why a software system or one system fits all doesn't work.
Yeah, so a part of one system doesn't fit all, and maybe having job procedures for everybody exactly the same is that the people are different. So I can think of one company that has something like 24 different languages in their workplace. So you cannot give, it depends. if the procedures were pictorial, maybe you could cover that, but you can't expect everyone to be able to speak English. And so then what is your expectation if you're trying to give the one-fit-all procedure to these people? And the other little beep I've got is these training sessions. Sometimes it might be refresher training and that'll be quickly, passed over. And some people may not have been doing that task for a while and they actually need a bit more time, but typically, they're in a big class sort of thing and they try to push these things through. So just to be cautioned about that, because not everybody is at the same place in their experience with this task or with this area. So then in that case, you might like to sift out, well, who is doing this job regularly and maybe can go through this refresher at one pace while we keep the others at a different pace, those sort of things. But the one and the other thing that tends to happen, Sharon, is these safe work procedures, that's another beef of mine, is they get every possible control or way to control for this and do this task. And it's about 30 pages long. And you think, well, do they really know what they're supposed to be doing? So is it any wonder if anything goes wrong and they ask the worker, well, where's your procedure and what did you follow, for them to be confused, because that's kind of setting up that. So you don't want, and that's what tends to happen, that the document gets bigger and bigger. Well, the safety management system gets heavier and bigger. And then to change that, you've got to go through so many layers. And so it's becomes very bureaucratic. And once it becomes like that, it's hard to make change. And then one of the dangers, and it's called infantilizing adults. So if we do everything then for the people, the workers, so here's your procedures, you're going to just follow that. And can I change it? No, it'd have to go to this person first to approve, then that person, then the other person, and then 3 years later the person goes, oh, I've just given up. It's too hard. It's in the too hard basket. But what happens then is they tend to just rely on the procedure. They rely on others to do their work properly. And so they stop thinking about, well, what are the hazards in my workplace? What are the risks that are happening? Is that person do I know enough about that person's job to know that they're doing their part that I'm interacting with? And so eventually they lose knowledge and skills. And that's really what we don't want. So good work design is looking at empowering the knowledge and skills, not just in how to design your work, but what are your hazards and how can we eliminate them, or what can we do to ensure that the risks are managed and that they're aware of how that is, so that they can tell their apprentices or whatever, and so that they become aware of hazards and risks, because otherwise, that knowledge doesn't get passed on and they'll actually get out of the habit, I guess, of looking for those things and then not being as skilled as they could be. And so your assets are wearing down. If you think of them then as your assets, then they're becoming less useful rather than empowering them and helping them learn about their job and aspects of their job that are going to improve the quality and efficiency and their health and their well-being, and opportunities where we can build up those psychosocial aspects of us being human.
So good work design is a dynamic process, as is risk management.
Yes, it's something that needs to be always on the lookout for change. And there was someone who said, I've just forgotten his name now, he said, if it's working now, it's out of date. Forget the guy's name. But anyway, it's perfect because, we can get comfortable. We can think, oh, we're in a good place. I've got all my things in place. Everyone's working well. Everyone's happy. But the thing is, technology is just moving on. And unless we can look at opportunities to continually improve, and it's dynamic, and we're empowering our workforce, and we're looking at where they would like to go. Sometimes they might like to advance. Other times they might say, look, I've got a lot of stress in my life. Can I actually go back and not feel like they're being less respected in the organisation. So, I think that dynamic, it just has to be alive, and that's where it becomes regenerative. And if you can regenerate and grow with your organisation, grow with the changes that are happening there, then you're going to be able to make that organisation sustainable. It might mean that organisation looks totally different in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. Doesn't matter. You've worked with it, you've morphed with it. It's been able to regenerate and continue on. And it might take on new business and end up morphing that way. But that is what we need. So we can't do that if we've got this, get ourselves locked into this is my business and this is what I'm doing. We need those tentacles, if you like, out there reading what's beyond our own little world.
One of the other questions that I had asked was, how do you get the buy-in? You talked about making sure that management is on board. How do you do that?
Well, I think you do it. I guess the first thing you've got to do is get your foot in the door. And I think so things like this podcast is really good because it helps people understand, well, what do we do? And what kind of a contribution can we do? And what's wrong with this other role person being able to do what someone else can do? So it's a matter of being aware of, well, what are all the different disciplines and what can they all contribute to well? And then it's about being out there and making ourselves aware is one way to become aware that to a business owner, oh, yes, this could be promising. Another example is sharing work done that's successful. And this is how we went about it. And then these are the results. And this is how this panned out. And so then there's this greater awareness. And then sometimes this will happen in-house. And I say, well, look, you've got an interest in human factors, or, I see that you're studying this or whatever, and they may have people in-house. Or I know certain industries have legislated that they need a human factors expert, or they need to address human factors, and that's the rail industry and aviation. So they tend to have human factors experts because that will help them meet those regulations. That's where policy can help. And so then it's a matter of really being at that strategic point, not being part of maybe HR and you're a sub-department of that, and then you're sitting somewhere where you're just trying to do things, but you don't know if you're aligning with the strategic development. If you're part of the strategic development phase, then you get buy-in from the management, but also the funding. So we're all working towards this strategic direction. And so if everyone is working, including the work and the workers who are contributing to their own work, then it's very productive. And then it's also very overt. You can write it down, you can trace it, you can check the success. So that's another thing Good Work Design does, is it wants to realise what were the efforts like. So it's not just about bringing in a consultant, thank you very much for designing this, off you go. It's about also checking to see how it's going, and where have we improved, what else is benefiting from this, and do our workers who are involved know that this is working or it isn't working. So it's about, first of all, in-house sharing that and celebrating those things, but also recognising when something didn't quite work. Okay, well, what didn't work? And then redo it again. But if you get that buy-in, and I think if you start small with little wins, then management will go, okay, someone's not going to give you $100,000 at first. They might say, look, 5,000, you've got 2 weeks. Let's see what you can do in 2 weeks. And so you're not going to pick something really dramatic. You're going to start small, get wins on the drawing board, and then the trust will build. And then what you really want to do is be up there where decisions are being made strategically. It's also good for oversight, so they know if you're involved in helping take workers off the floor so they can help you with design work or whatever, be in a room to ideate and to build ideas about what could be possible. then they can see, oh, yes, we need the workers to do that because this is how it's going to go. It's, it's going to develop their work. It's going to improve productivity. It's going to help the workers happy. We're going to retain them. We're not going to have a high turnover. I think that is how you build that trust. And trust can easily be broken. So it's something that you've got to maintain as well.
You're looking for feedback. Any suggestions on how to develop feedback loops or systems for feedback?
I think it's in the initial communications. If you've got a project that's nice and discreet, you build the communication channels in there so that the people that you do involve can get the feedback back on what their contribution was. And also to feedback to whom they're representing. So I was on a project where they got an experienced controller in for this project, and he wasn't living there. So that's another problem. If a project takes several years to develop and that person's off their job for several years, they may no longer be current with what exactly is happening. So they then don't become a good representative of that department. But if you take them out when they're needed at certain stages and they get feedback on their contribution, but they also feed back to the people who will be affected, other workers, then that works really well. So at that initial, yes, you want to engage me. This is how it's going to be. We need to, when you're developing the communication, who do we need? Who are our stakeholders? Sometimes you will miss a stakeholder and you'll have to go back to that and add them. And then it's how do we communicate and represent that information in ways that stakeholder can understand what's going on. So the finance people will be interested in the dollars, for instance. Other times, if it's an operationals manager, they want to see the flow of how things are going to go across. So you've got to present that information in receivable ways as well. I always recommend at the beginning, conceptual stage, identifying who are your stakeholders, who needs to be communicated, and then build those communication loops in so that it becomes part of the process. If you come in late, then to say, well, hold on here, there isn't going to be feedback. I don't see where is the feedback. Can you explain it? And if it's not there, then build that in. It's very important.
So you mentioned that good work design leads to regenerative futures, adaptability, sustainability, healthier and a happier workplace. What happens if we design without considering the worker?
Well, what happens when we do anything without considering the worker is that they will then consider whether they're suitable for that work. So, they might do a job interview and it sounds like the type of work they'd like to do, but it's more than just a pay packet. It's a rare person who says, okay, I just want to do my job. What do I do? Tell me what I'm going to do, and that's it. You would apply for a job because you're kind of interested in that field or that industry, and there will come a point in time when the worker will say, I'm not a good fit for this. And so if they have the luxury to leave, then you will have high turnover. I've got an example, a really good one of that, where I visited a nuclear power station in France, and the controllers were so young. And somebody asked a question. I noticed, or they made a comment, I noticed that all of your operators in this room are young. They look like they're just out of uni And he said, actually, because everything is so automated, we have a hard time keeping our staff. So we do have high turnover. So our experienced staff, it's no longer interesting to them to just monitor. And so they get new graduates, but then after it's a 2-year turnover, and that was going back 6 years ago. So, they will decide to leave if they have that chance. Sometimes people can't afford to lose their job, and then that you end up with absentee and presentee sort of issues where they'll rock up for work, but they're really not interested. And, you know, the productivity gains will be low and things like that.
So what are some of the risks for design without workers in terms of the risk to workers directly?
Well, as I said before, if someone else has designed everything, that worker may not really know what are the hazards and what are the risks that I need to be careful of. And even they may have really good solutions, but they never come out because nobody's interested in knowing what their solution is. And sometimes people will innovate and, you know, job craft their job so that it's a bit easier. And if someone says, no, you can't do that, if they see it and don't take the opportunity to at least explore that, which might improve things, then eventually that person won't feel respected. They won't feel, and, you know, it'll put their health and safety at risk if you don't know what the risks are, and then you are at risk. You know, that is the worst. So the newest worker on the newest place is probably at the biggest risk because not having that knowledge. And if you stifle workers, they become infantilized. So they will lose those skills of looking and even looking to be creative, which isn't good for the whole workforce, really.
Thanks for joining us at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, where human-centred design really matters. If you like this podcast, make us your favourite in your podcast app. We look forward to chatting with you next time.